Human found an alien girl guarding his fire. Her explanation at dawn changed the whole night. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The desert night pressed in around Ethan Cole like a cold fist, the kind of cold that sneaks under your jacket and settles in your bones. His campfire was the only warm spot for miles, a trembling circle of orange in a sea of dark sand and silent dunes. The wind kept shifting, carrying grit that tapped against the metal hull of his grounded survey rover, making the whole machine sound tired, like it was sighing in its sleep. Ethan had spent the entire day trying to fix the rover's fried guidance system, crawling under panels with numb hands, muttering to himself while the sun beat down hard enough to sting. By the time dusk arrived, he couldn't do anything but sit beside the small fire, boots stretched toward the heat, eyelids sinking lower with every passing minute. At some point he must have drifted off, because the next thing he remembered was a sound. Tiny, careful, like someone brushing sand with their fingertips. Ethan opened his eyes slowly, not moving at first. The fire was still alive, but barely, and someone was sitting beside it. A figure, small and still, knees drawn close, hands cupped around the fragile flame as if guarding it from the wind. For a heartbeat, he thought he was dreaming. Her skin glowed faintly in the firelight, a soft violet-blue sheen that shifted with every flicker. Strands of silver hair brushed across her face as she leaned closer to the warmth, as if hiding from the cold that swept the open desert. She looked young, no older than her early 20s by human standards, but her posture held a kind of quiet discipline, like someone who'd been taught to wait in silence. Ethan's muscles tensed, instinct fighting exhaustion. He didn't reach for his tool blade, didn't sit up fast. Sudden moves felt wrong, like they might shatter the delicate moment happening in front of him. Instead he spoke softly, voice rough with sleep. "Hey, you okay?" The girl startled, but didn't run. Her hands stayed exactly where they were, shielding the flame. She didn't speak, only glanced at him with wide, pale silver eyes. Unfamiliar, unreadable. Ethan pushed himself upright, palms cold from the sand. The fire wavered. She reacted instantly, leaning closer, protecting it with her body from a gust of wind, as if the little flame meant more to her than the risk of him. Ethan blinked, confused. Of all things she could have been doing out here, watching him, stealing supplies, trying to signal someone, she was guarding his fire. A tiny glow in the endless dark. He softened his tone. "It's all right. I'm not going to hurt you." The words came naturally, the same way he might talk to someone lost on a hiking trail back home. But this wasn't home, and she wasn't human. Still, something in her expression shifted. Just a notch, just enough to show she understood his calm. The wind died down for a moment, leaving only the quiet crackle of the fire between them. That was the first time Ethan noticed she was shivering, shoulders trembling beneath a thin fabric that wasn't built for cold nights. He reached slowly into his pack, pulled out a foil thermal sheet, and held it out halfway. Not forced, just offered. She hesitated, eyes darting between him and the shimmering blanket. Then, gently, she accepted it, wrapping it around her shoulders without ever letting the fire out of her sight. Ethan didn't understand her. Not yet. But as the flame steadied and the girl finally looked up at him over its glow, he felt the night shift, quietly, almost imperceptibly, towards something neither of them had expected. The fire's glow softened as the night deepened, shrinking into a steady ember that pulsed against the wind. Ethan Cole shifted slowly, careful not to spook the girl still curled close to the warmth. The thermal sheet he had given her caught the firelight and reflected it in thin waves, turning her violet-blue skin into something almost luminescent. She kept her hands near the flame, not touching it, just guarding it, as if each flicker carried meaning he could not read. Ethan rubbed the stiffness from his neck and spoke gently, keeping his voice low. "Do you understand me?" She glanced up. Just a small movement, but enough. Her silver eyes monitored him with the alertness of someone who had spent too many nights scanning shadows. No fear, but no trust either. "My name is Ethan." He tried again, tapping his chest. Then, a beat passed. Then her fingers brushed her collarbone lightly, and she whispered something soft, a single word shaped by an accent unlike anything he had heard from the translator channels. It sounded like Silari. She said it once, carefully, as if offering him something fragile. Ethan nodded. Silari. Her eyes widened a fraction, surprised he had repeated it correctly. A faint shift in her posture told him he had done something right. The wind swept another wave of cold across the desert, rattling the loose panel on the side of his rover. Ethan stood, brushing sand from his palms. I need to check the power core, he said quietly, though he knew she would not understand the words. Still, tone mattered. He moved slowly around the rover, the sand crunching under his boots. The diagnostics panel blinked weakly, the battery indicators dropping faster than he liked. If temperatures fell any lower, the auxiliary heater would cut out. He glanced back at the fire. Silari was still guarding it, shoulders hunched, blanket wrapped tight, her attention fixed on the tiny flame as if it were the only anchor in the world. Ethan returned to her side and crouched. I have a heater inside. It is warm. You can rest there. She did not move. Instead, she shook her head once, firm, and placed her hand closer to the fire as if to explain her answer. Ethan exhaled slowly. You are staying because of the fire. It was a guess, but something in her expression confirmed it. She was not just seeking warmth. She had a purpose he did not understand yet. He eased himself down beside her, letting the fire warm his hands. All right, he murmured. We can stay here. Silari shifted the blanket slightly so the edge covered more of her arms. A simple gesture, but deliberate, like someone acknowledging a shared space. Minutes passed with only the fire's soft crackle filling the silence. Then, unexpectedly, Silari reached toward the sand and traced a gentle arc with her fingertip, a simple, curved line. She pointed at the fire, then at the arc, then at the horizon where the first faint tint of lighter sky barely touched the darkness. Ethan watched her movements carefully. She repeated the arc, slower this time. Dawn, he realized. She was waiting for dawn, not waiting to leave, waiting to explain. Ethan leaned back, letting the cold whisper against his shoulders while the fire warmed his face. Whatever she needed to say, whatever reason had brought her to his camp and bound her to that fragile flame, it was tied to sunrise. And sunrise was only a few hours away. He stayed awake beside her, listening to the wind carry thin trails of sand across the dunes, watching the quiet determination in her eyes as she guarded the fire as if guarding a promise. The night thinned slowly, losing some of its heaviness as the first hints of morning gathered far beyond the dunes. The sky was still a deep navy, but a thin silver edge had begun to show where the horizon curved away. Ethan Cole sat with his knees up, arms resting loosely across them, watching Silari in the shifting glow of the fire. She had not moved much since she traced that arc in the sand. Her posture remained alert but calmer now, as if the promise of dawn had settled something inside her. The thermal blanket wrapped around her shoulders rustled softly whenever the wind changed direction. Ethan noticed she kept adjusting its edge so it would not touch the fire, a small but precise habit. She guarded the flame, but she respected it deeply too. His breath fogged faintly in the cold, the kind that seeped through layers and made the world feel wide and empty. He glanced at the sky, then at her. Is something going to happen at sunrise? He asked quietly, more to fill the silence than expecting an answer. Silari lifted her gaze toward the horizon, her silver eyes reflecting the faint, growing light. She did not speak, but the way she breathed in, slow, steady, told him the question mattered. She was waiting for something, or someone, or a moment she could not reach without daylight. Ethan rubbed his palms together near the fire, letting the warmth settle into his skin. The flame flickered against Silari's hands, which she held steady like she understood how much even a slight tremor could disturb it. You know, he murmured, most people do not sit out here in the cold all night to protect a stranger's fire. Silari looked at him then, expression soft but unreadable. She tapped the sand lightly and traced one more line, straighter this time, pointing from the flame outward. Ethan leaned closer, frowning thoughtfully. You protected it to protect me? She did not react at first. Then she moved her hand from the fire, inching it toward him, stopping halfway as if unsure whether the gesture was allowed. Her fingers hovered in the cold air before she drew a small circle over the sand. Then she pointed to him. Ethan felt the meaning settle in his chest. Because it is mine, he said softly, understanding. You kept it alive because I needed it. Silari nodded once. A calm, resolute nod. Ethan let out a quiet breath, not from surprise, but from the strange warmth the gesture stirred in him. A kind of gratitude he was not certain how to express without making her uncomfortable. The fire cracked gently as a small piece of wood shifted. Silari moved instinctively to shield it again, but Ethan reached out a hand, hovering it between her and the wind. She blinked, startled, but did not pull away. They guarded the fire together for a moment, their shadows merging on the sand as the horizon brightened another shade. A faint hum rose from his rover as the temperature sensors activated, letting out a soft chime that signaled a drop. Ethan ignored it. The fire mattered more right now. Silari, he said softly, testing the name with care. She turned to him fully for the first time since the night began. Her face was calm, almost serene. Behind her, the sky shifted from navy to deep indigo. Dawn was coming, and whatever she had waited all night to say was drawing closer with it. The sky continued to pale, shifting from deep indigo to a muted violet that made the edges of the dunes look softer, less harsh. The fire between Ethan and Silari held steady, its glow warmer now that the coldest part of the night had passed. Ethan could feel the change in the air, the faint lift that came before sunrise on barren worlds like this one. He glanced at Silari, noticing the way her shoulders eased as the light grew stronger. She watched the horizon with quiet focus, her silver eyes reflecting the early shimmer of dawn. The thermal blanket wrapped around her moved gently with each breath she took, and Ethan realized she had not shivered in several minutes. She seemed calmer, more anchored, as if the approaching daylight gave her strength. Ethan shifted closer to the fire and spoke softly. Is this when you tell me? Silari blinked slowly, then looked at him with an expression that carried a mix of caution and gratitude. She placed her hand over the fire again, not touching the flames but cupping the heat, letting it warm her palms. Then she pressed that warmth to her chest, right over her heartbeat, and held it there for a moment. Ethan watched carefully. She repeated the motion. Fire. Heart. Fire. Heart. He tilted his head. The fire means something to you. Silari nodded once. She lowered her hand to the sand and drew a small symbol, a circle with a short line rising upward from the center, like a tiny flame. Beside it she drew a taller figure, then a smaller one, then tapped the fire again. Ethan leaned in, the sand cool beneath his fingertips. People, he murmured. Your people. Her breath caught the light as she exhaled. She extended her arm toward the horizon, palm open, as if offering the first rays of dawn to the fire itself. Then she touched the symbol again, her fingers careful and reverent. Ethan felt understanding settle slowly, like a piece of a puzzle sliding into place. Your people follow the fire, he said quietly. Or protect it. Silari looked at him with a soft intensity that made the moment feel heavier. She traced 3 more symbols in the sand, each one a variation of the small flame. When she was done, she lifted her gaze to him and placed both hands around the fire again, her expression solemn. Ethan swallowed gently. Your people are gone. Silari's eyes lowered, and she gave the smallest, saddest nod he had ever seen. Not dramatic, not broken, just truth. The heat from the fire flickered between them, warming the space where grief hung quietly. Ethan did not reach for her. He did not fill the silence with words she could not understand. Instead, he mirrored her posture, placing his hands near the flame, letting its warmth reflect back at her. Slowly, she looked up. Her eyes softened. She pointed at him, then at the fire, then at herself. Ethan felt his chest tighten. We share it now, he whispered. Silari blinked once, a slow, almost peaceful movement. The horizon brightened another shade, washing the dunes in gentle light. She leaned closer to the fire, drawing its warmth into her palms again. But this time she offered her hands outward, toward him, as if sharing the warmth in return. Ethan accepted it, lifting his hands to meet hers in the space above the flame. No words, no translation, just the quiet exchange of heat in the first breath of dawn. The sunlight crept in slowly, brushing a pale gold across the tops of the dunes and softening the hard edges of the desert into gentle curves. The fire between them glowed warmer in the new light, no longer fighting the cold, but settling into a steady flame that felt almost calm. Ethan Cole shifted slightly, letting the warmth touch his hands before lowering them to the sand. Silari watched the sunrise with a quietness that felt intentional, as if the moment itself was part of a ritual. Her silver eyes reflected the growing light, and for the first time since he had met her, her shoulders relaxed completely. The thermal blanket draped around her softened the angles of her posture, making her look less like a frightened traveler and more like someone reclaiming a piece of herself. Ethan glanced at the horizon before turning back to her. "You waited for the sun," he said softly. "Why?" Silari lowered her gaze to the fire, then lifted her hand and traced a slow arc in the air, mirroring the path of the rising light. She brought her palm down to hover above the flame, feeling its warmth, then pressed that warmth gently to her chest. Ethan studied her motions, understanding another layer unfold. "The fire and the sun," he murmured. "For your people, they are connected." Silari looked at him, and the faintest hint of a nod confirmed it. She reached toward the sand and drew two symbols side by side. One was the tiny flame she had shown him before. The other was a larger circle with radiating lines, unmistakably the sun. Then she connected the two symbols with a short stroke of her fingertip. Ethan felt the meaning settle over him like a warm wave. "They are part of the same thing," he said quietly. "A shared source." Silari drew a third symbol then, a small shape that resembled a fragile seed. She set it between the fire and the sun, touching it lightly as if it represented something she valued deeply. She pointed at herself, then at the symbol. Ethan shifted closer, his knees brushing the cooling sand. "You," he whispered. "You are part of that connection." Silari held her breath for a moment, then released it in a slow, steady exhale. She pressed her palm to the seed symbol again, carefully, almost lovingly. Ethan watched her, feeling a slow warmth growing beneath his ribs. This was not fear. It was not desperation. It was identity. The fire, the sun, the fragile symbol between them. It was who she was. He felt a sudden desire to ease the weight she carried, even if he did not understand all of it. "You can tell me more," he said softly. "I am listening." Silari turned her face toward him. The sunlight caught in her hair, making the strands shimmer like fine silver threads. She extended her hand toward him, stopping just at the edge of his. Not touching, but close enough that he could feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin. She pointed to him, then to the fire, then to the sun, repeating the same connection she had drawn in the sand. Ethan blinked, surprised. "Me?" Silari nodded once, slowly. Ethan let out a quiet breath. He did not fully grasp what she was trying to say, but the impression was clear. To her, he now belonged inside that connection. The fire crackled softly, sparked by a new gust of morning air. Silari lifted both hands around it, not to protect it, but to honor it, and she inclined her head in a small gesture that felt ceremonial. Ethan mirrored her instinctively, lowering his hands near the flame. For a few long seconds, they sat like that, two figures sharing the warmth of a single fragile fire under a widening morning sky. Silari drew in another deep breath, steadier now, and when she looked at him again, he sensed that the moment they had been waiting for was finally near. The morning light spread wider, settling into a soft amber that warmed the sand and painted faint highlights along the curves of Silari's face. The fire burned lower now, no longer fighting the night, but holding steady as if it understood it had one last purpose before the day claimed it. Ethan Cole stayed close, knees drawn up, palms resting lightly against the ground. He watched Silari with quiet attention, sensing she was gathering the last pieces of whatever she had been trying to express since the moment she found his camp. Silari lifted her hands from the fire and let the warmth dissipate across her fingers. Her expression shifted, not fearful, but contemplative, as if she needed the right light to give shape to her meaning. She traced a slow circle in the air, then pressed both palms to her chest. Ethan nodded gently. "You are part of the sun and the fire. I understand that much." She did not correct him, but her eyes softened, encouraging him to follow further. She bent to the sand again, drawing the small seed symbol she had shown earlier. Then she added another symbol beside it, this one shaped like a path that curved gently forward. She tapped the path, then pointed toward the fire. Ethan leaned closer. "A journey," he whispered. "Your journey." Silari exhaled slowly, her breath catching the warm light as she tapped the path again. Then she pointed toward him. Ethan blinked. Me? She nodded once, her face calm but certain. She extended her hand and placed her fingertip beside the path, as if adding another presence to it. Ethan felt a gentle pull in his chest, an understanding forming with slow clarity. You came to my fire because your path crossed with mine. Silari lowered her gaze, tapping the sand with a small, thoughtful motion. She then lifted one hand toward the horizon, where the sun had inched higher, warming the desert with a soft orange glow. With the other hand, she pointed again at Ethan, then at herself, and finally at the sun. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. You could not explain until sunrise. Her expression brightened slightly, confirming it. She placed her hands around the fire again, then opened them, offering the warmth outward, letting it dissipate gently toward the rising light. The pieces clicked together in Ethan's mind. He spoke slowly, carefully. Your people believe that fire carries truth in the dark, but the sun reveals the truth of the fire. Silari looked at him with visible relief, as if grateful he had bridged the last gap she had been unable to cross alone. She touched her chest again, then traced a small spiral in the sand, radiating outward from the seed. Ethan studied it, his heartbeat steady. You are the seed, he said quietly, and the sun helps it grow. Silari nodded once, a soft, resolute motion that held deep meaning. She took a breath, then made a gesture he recognized from earlier. She connected the fire, the sun, and the seed with one continuous line. Ethan swallowed, understanding the message beneath her movements. You came here to grow, he murmured. To survive. To continue what your people began. A faint shimmer of emotion crossed her silver eyes, something like gratitude mixed with quiet sorrow. She extended her hand toward him, just as she had near the fire earlier. Ethan mirrored her, placing his hand near hers without touching, acknowledging the closeness she allowed. The sunlight warmed their joined shadows on the sand. Silari pressed her free hand gently to the seed symbol again. Then, slowly, she drew a new line from the symbol toward Ethan. He felt each moment land in him with soft weight. You think I am part of this, he whispered. Part of what comes next for you. Silari inhaled, steady and sure, and nodded. The fire crackled faintly, sending a small spark upward as if agreeing with her. Ethan looked at the symbol, then at her, and felt the morning settle around them with new meaning. Whatever her people had lost, whatever she had carried through the night, she had shared it now. And the connection she offered was not small. It was the beginning of something fragile, important, and quietly binding. The sun climbed higher, spreading a warm haze over the sand, and washing the distant dunes in soft gold. But the quiet between Ethan and Silari did not feel finished. It felt like the pause before a choice. The fire had dwindled to a glowing bed of ember-red coals, no longer needed for warmth, but still holding the last breath of the night's meaning. Ethan studied the symbols Silari had drawn and the line she had added toward him, a mark that felt heavier than any words she could have spoken. He stood slowly, brushing sand from his palms, and glanced toward his rover. The temperature warnings were blinking in a slow, patient rhythm, waiting for him to do something about the failing guidance system. If I can get the rover moving, I can take us both somewhere safer, he said, keeping his voice calm. There is a settlement north of here. Supplies, shelter, people who can help. Silari looked from him to the rover, her expression tightening with a flicker of uncertainty. She rose carefully, gathering the thermal blanket around her shoulders. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting the sunlight warm her face, her breath steady and quiet. She touched the seed symbol again, then pointed toward the settlement's direction, but her hesitation made the motion small, almost fragile. Ethan took a gentle step closer. You want to go, but you are not sure, he murmured. She responded by placing one hand near the ember bed, hovering above the heat. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the weight of whatever she was trying to protect. She extended her hand toward him again, not to take his, but to offer the warmth she had gathered from the fire. When he lifted his palm to mirror the gesture, she traced a small arc in the air between them. Ethan felt the meaning settle through him. You want me to promise something, he whispered. Silari nodded. She pointed toward the horizon, then touched the seed symbol once more. Whatever her future was meant to be, Whatever survival meant for her now, it depended on what he chose next. Ethan understood the message, even without words. She needed him to commit to the path she had shown him, not just guide her to safety. She needed to know that he would not abandon her when the fire was gone. A soft chime sounded from the rover as the diagnostics ran another check, reminding him that time was slipping. Ethan took a breath and knelt beside the ember bed. He lifted a small piece of wood and placed it gently on the fading coals, watching as a new flicker of flame curled upward. Silari watched him closely, her silver eyes reflecting the first hint of renewed light. Ethan kept his voice steady, letting each word carry the truth he meant. "Where you go, I will go," he said softly. "Your path is not alone." Silari's breath shook once, not out of fear but relief, and she placed her hand near the flame one last time, sealing the small ritual with quiet certainty. The ember brightened. The sun warmed their faces. And in that fragile space between fire and daylight, Ethan felt the moment shift, binding their two journeys into one. The ember bed glowed gently behind them as Ethan prepared the rover for travel, its panels clicking softly in the warming sunlight. The machine's systems hummed in a low, uneven rhythm, the sound of a device that was tired but willing to try again. Silari stood beside him, the thermal blanket wrapped neatly around her shoulders, her silver eyes moving between the rover and the brightening horizon. She held herself with a calm steadiness now, grounded in the promise he had made. Ethan tightened a connection cable and checked the readings on the small screen mounted near the rover's front panel. The guidance system was still unstable, but with the sun up, the solar recovery boost might give them enough power to move. He tapped the metal casing in a gentle, encouraging way, a habit he had developed after years of coaxing half-functioning machines to cooperate. Silari approached slowly, her footsteps soft against the warming sand. She lifted her hand and pointed to one of the blinking indicators, then looked at him questioningly. Ethan nodded. "Yes, it is almost ready. We will head north to the settlement. They will have tools. And shelter." Silari absorbed his words, or at least his tone, then traced a small arc in the air, a gesture that had become familiar. "A question." He smiled faintly. "Yes, I will stay with you." She held his gaze for a moment longer before her attention shifted back toward the fire. The last of the embers smoldered quietly, sending up thin wisps of warmth. She stepped toward them and knelt gracefully, cupping her hands over the fading glow. It felt ceremonial, as if she were giving it a final acknowledgement before they left it behind. Ethan watched her movements with quiet respect. She pressed the warmth from her palms to her chest again, but this time she extended one hand outward, offering a portion of that warmth toward him. He mirrored her gesture, letting his palm hover close to hers. Their hands did not touch, but the shared intention bridged the space between them. Silari lowered her hands and rose to her feet. She looked at the ember bed once more, then lifted her chin slightly, signaling she was ready. Ethan extinguished the last ember with a small shovel of sand, not harshly, but with the same care she had shown all night. When he turned back to her, she stood close to the rover's side door, waiting for his lead, but not helpless. The sun had climbed enough to cast clear shadows behind them, long shapes stretching across the desert floor. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle somewhere deep within him. This was not just travel. It was the next step of a promise. He opened the door and offered his hand for balance as she climbed inside. She accepted the gesture with a calm grace, settling into the passenger seat. The interior of the rover smelled faintly of metal, dust, and the lingering heat of the previous day. Silari surveyed it quietly, her fingers brushing the edge of the control console with gentle curiosity. Ethan powered up the engine, the rover vibrating softly as it awakened. Screens flickered on, showing coordinates, solar levels, and a faint route line stretching toward the distant settlement. As the rover began to move, Silari looked back once through the rear window. Her gaze lingered on the small mound of sand where the fire had been, the place where night had given her the safety to speak, and sunrise had given her the courage to share her truth. She turned back toward Ethan, her expression calm and steady. A new arc traced lightly through the air, not a question this time, but a quiet acknowledgement of the path they were taking together. Ethan answered with a single nod and guided the rover forward into the widening morning light. The rover moved in a steady rhythm across the warming desert, its wheels pressing soft tracks into the sand that trailed behind them like a quiet signature of where they had been. The morning light grew brighter with each passing minute, filling the cabin with a pale glow that softened every surface. Ethan Cole kept one hand on the steering controls, guiding the rover toward the distant settlement marked faintly on the navigation screen. Silari sat beside him, her posture calm, her silver eyes watching the horizon with a steady awareness. The thermal blanket was still wrapped around her shoulders, but she held it loosely now, no longer clinging to it for warmth, but wearing it like something familiar. The sunlight caught in her hair, turning the strands into shimmering threads that moved gently whenever she shifted. Ethan glanced at her briefly. "We should reach the settlement in a few hours," he said softly. "Maybe less if the solar boost holds." Silari turned her head toward him and traced a small circle in the air, a gesture that had become her way of acknowledging understanding. Her hand then drifted toward the control console, hovering near one of the display lights. She did not touch anything, simply studied the readouts with quiet curiosity. Ethan smiled faintly. "You will learn this fast," he said. "Machines like this are not that complicated once you know how to talk to them." Silari watched his hands for a moment, then pressed her palm lightly against her chest before pointing at him. Ethan's smile softened. "Yes," he murmured. "I will teach you." The rover hit a gentle rise in the sand, and the cabin swayed slightly. Silari steadied herself with one hand on the seat, but her eyes remained focused, alert. She looked back toward the distant dunes behind them, her gaze lingering in a way that seemed thoughtful rather than worried. The place where their fire had burned was far out of sight now, but something about the way she looked made Ethan think she was saying goodbye to more than the embers. After a moment, she traced another shape in the air, a seed, then a line extending forward. Ethan felt a soft breath leave him. "You are ready to move on," he said quietly. Silari nodded. She then hesitated, her fingers hovering in midair before she drew a new symbol, one he had not seen before. Two small shapes side by side, connected by a single curved line. She looked at him as she completed the gesture. Ethan's chest tightened with a quiet, unexpected warmth. "Together," he whispered. Silari's expression softened in a way that felt like dawn all over again. She turned her gaze forward, watching the horizon with calm certainty. Ethan leaned back slightly in his seat, the hum of the rover surrounding them in a gentle vibration. He did not speak for a while. The silence felt right, filled with unspoken understanding. As the settlement finally appeared as a faint outline in the distance, Silari lifted her hand one last time and made a small arc in the air, mirroring the rising sun. But this time, she added a second arc beside it, aligned and steady. Ethan watched her fingers trace the shape and felt something settle quietly inside him, something simple and true. The arcs were not a question. They were a promise. The rover carried them forward, the morning light bright around them, and in the soft quiet of that moment, the world felt larger and gentler than either of them had expected. The sun reflected in Silari's eyes, and for the first time since the night began, the light there looked unmistakably human.